What's up? What's up? What's up, guys? How are you guys doing? Thanks for tuning in. Firstly, this is a conversational series, which and this is the first episode of the conversational series in which we have with us Matt Hunt. Matt Hunt is a professional poker player and a coach and an instructor. I think he has done over 2,000 hours of one-on-one coaching with people and has put out a bunch of content for Solve for Why. And in fact, the first time that I've seen him, he felt like this brother from the other part of the country with his red beard, where I was having this huge beard, and I'm like, I get it, man. And and then
I like it.
and finally I got a chance to get in touch with him, and he's been very active in the Twitter community and everything about the mental health of poker and the different aspects of mindset about the game. So I thought it'll be an interesting conversation to have him as the first guest and talk to him about what the game of poker is for him and how does he perceive this and the aspects of life and how does that integrate. So without much further ado, let me welcome Matt Hunt. What's up? What's
Thank
up,
you,
man?
guys. Glad to be here.
So Matt, so for all the viewers, can you just give us a little bit background about yourself and what's your
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm originally from the UK. I don't know if you guys can tell from my accent, but my accent isn't fully American yet. I live in the US, but I'm originally from the UK, and I've been playing poker professionally for about 9 years now, I think. But I've been playing for about 10 and a half years. And I've been coaching for 7 years, since late 2013. I used to work for Tournament Poker Edge. I now work for Solve for Why TV. And I've also done a good amount of work with Poker Detox as well. So working with Nick Howard's guys over there, which I know you've been involved with as
Yeah.
well. And at the moment, my sort of focus in poker is I'm obviously doing a lot of coaching, and I'm also kind of splitting my time into mental health advocacy. So I'm streaming on Twitch and creating content around mental health, because I think that both inside poker and outside, mental health is a really important topic for us to be aware of and us to be talking about in society these days. So I am branching out a little bit outside of poker, but my background is very much in the poker space, and I've been there for a long time. So like you say, I have been pretty active in the community, I think, for a while, and thankfully, it seems like the message about mental health is starting to catch on, I think. So I'm happy to be involved in that aspect.
So, with respect to mental health,
hmm
what has been your like sort of most pivotal points in your journey through poker, like which sort of put you more into this direction from being a player to someone who started talking about, the firstly mindset. Like the first thing
hmm
I saw you was in this video in Detox, where
hmm
you were talking about how we keep swinging from one end of the spectrum to the other end. Like
hmm
I think a lot of people also see this where they've been playing like tight and then like they go into this thing and then they just get maniac and stuff like that. So I saw like
hmm
you were sharing these ideas about how mindset starts. But personally for you, like what was the journey like? Were there any pivotal moments which sort of put you on that path?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the the early part of my career, maybe the first half or so of my career, probably I think 2011 through about 2014 or 2015, I had a lot of ups and downs in terms of my progress, in terms of how I kind of got accustomed to being a professional poker player. The types of things that I was doing to manage my career. And I think that there were periods where my past history of depression would come back. There were periods where anxiety about results, anxiety about all kinds of things related to poker would come in. And over time, it started to get me more in tune, I think, with the way that our mental health from outside poker, our experiences from outside poker interact with the way that we experience the game itself. When we're going through downswings or upswings, it's very, very common for those to be closely connected to things that we're going through on a personal level. So for me, I went through some big downswings in maybe, I think it was like the middle of 2012, and then late 2013. But in between that, I had a big upswing where I had some really big scores. And so it really familiarized me with a lot of the mental ups and downs. And I think that as I've gotten older, I'm 33 now. I was about 24 when I started. I've started to become more aware of how much these things matter and how much interaction there is between the experiences that we have when we're playing poker and our emotional experience of life outside the game. So over time, I think, come to a place where I recognize that you really can't separate the emotional experience that we have day to day with the, let's say, mindset or
Yeah,
mental
yeah,
game
yeah, yeah.
of poker itself. It's
True.
all one thing. It's all one experience. And poker is simply a specific activity that requires us to understand ourselves on a very deep level. And
True.
you can't really do that. You can't really understand yourself that well unless you're willing to investigate your emotions and have a good relationship with those emotions, I guess. And
Yeah,
that over time is something that I kind of came to believe very strongly about poker.
yeah. And just like to sort of talk in that personal context of what how it has appealed to me. Like the first one of the first things which I sort of realized about poker was it was just like getting to me way too much, like compared to
Mm,
the other activities which I was just
yeah.
maybe the other activities were not challenging enough or whatever. Like I could have like there's a certain expertise or like certain thing that you got through that, but maybe one thing which was really hitting me hard was I was getting like too emotionally fluttered in this game compared to any other
Hmm.
activity. Like even difficult life
Yeah.
situations, I was able to handle. But then I was like, then there is this dilemma, Then it's like you have this choice. Okay, just ignore it. You know what?
Yeah.
Like just ignore it and don't bother about it. But then I was of this thing that maybe if I leave it now, uh, 2 years down the line in some other activity, some situation will come where again these things will come to the surface.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
so at this point, we are sort of posed with this interesting dilemma where we can fix it tactically, right? We can fix it on a tactical level. We can say, okay, maybe
Hmm.
this and this is the mistakes that I'm doing, or these are sort of the things that I'm prone to doing, and hence let me not just do that. Or we
Hmm.
can sort of get into this other direction where we start diving deeper into like why, like what is the unconscious programming that's kicking in, and like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. And go
yeah,
ahead. Sorry.
yeah. So this was sort of the direction which I initially was getting curious of, and I was curious, like I didn't know what to do, and then I went on a big upswing. So then I went
Hmm.
to the other side of things where I was like, oh wow, like this is pretty nice, and like I'm doing all this stuff, and like I already have this awareness about myself. I'm taking this game in this direction, and all of this is happening. And then
Hmm.
suddenly, you just don't see it coming, and the downswing hits you, and then suddenly you are on the other side of things. Oh, like I suck,
Hmm.
like I'm not at
Yeah.
all good. So this was a very like because I was already looking in that direction, and then life gave me a huge amounts of data points to start looking at it. So
Yeah.
that's yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's very common. I think we have a strange relationship with results in poker, right? Because on the one hand, our goal when we start out is to get good results. We
Right.
everybody wants to get good results. We want to engineer a positive end result for ourselves because nobody wants to lose money when we play. But the paradox of it is if we want to get that end result, we have to stop focusing on that end result because unlike almost any other area of life, the correlation between the actions that we take and the end result is it's very very different in poker. If we want to have the greatest chance of having a positive uh, outcome at the end of it, a lot of the time it's going to feel to us like the best route to doing that is low risk, right? To be risk averse,
Yeah.
because it's hard for our brain to internalize the idea that the best chance of a positive outcome is also the best chance of a significant negative outcome. But we
Hmm.
have to overcome that programming and understand that a lack of risk basically can't really lead to a positive outcome. It can't really lead to the outcome that we want. So there's a lot of development that has to go on there in addressing how we feel as a person about risk, and how we feel about positive and negative outcomes, and what they say about us as a person. And
Yeah.
when we take a risk and it doesn't work out, do we feel like that means something about us as an individual, or do we simply feel that that was the best decision and the outcome doesn't say anything good or bad about us? And it's a hard thing to reach a point in poker where you don't interpret results as any kind of feedback about you individually.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
it's very difficult to get to that point. It takes a
Yeah.
long time and a lot of effort,
Yeah.
because most of the time, when the goal is to win
Hmm.
money
Yeah.
and we lose money, we think we failed. And
True.
so when we think we failed, there's all kinds of cultural messages that we get from the world around us that says, hey, you suck, you failed,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all those things. And it's really, really hard to overcome those things. And I certainly have a lot of sympathy for anybody who's struggling with that kind of thing, because it was a struggle for me for a long time. I decided to be a professional poker player, and when I felt like that wasn't going well, I started to question the choice. I started to say, maybe I shouldn't have done this. Maybe this was a bad idea. But in the end, I stuck with it, and thankfully, I had the opportunity to continue doing it,
Yeah. I think there's
and
there's
I'm
sorry.
grateful that it did.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Like basically, you spoke about one aspect of what the game is talking, like what the game is teaching about life in general, which is about
Mm-hmm.
like maybe being risk averse isn't the best strategy to succeed in a certain whatever it could be. It could be
Mm-hmm.
business, it could be poker, whatever.
Yeah.
And the second aspect of it, so in like that there is process orientedness, or like some of the stuff which the game teaches, which will be transferable to skills as life. And then the
Mm-hmm.
second thing which you sort of spoke about is the what sort of, how do you perceive all this information on your self-worth, sort of like, so to
Yeah.
speak, right? Like, so I think maybe let's talk about the first part a little bit. So what aspects of the game are think like in your perception are the ones which are sort of give you like help you become a better to navigate your other skills in life? It could be,
Mm-hmm.
so mostly if you're talking about like the social or like economic situations and all that, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
some of the stuff was the game teaches. Yeah, can you talk a little bit
Sure.
about
Yeah. I
that?
think
Yeah.
that in in a lot of ways, the perception that I've come to over time in terms of what poker is and what our brains are doing when we're actually playing poker is that all we're really doing is we're taking in information, where the information is input into our brains. We're taking in all this different information about our environment, and we're using our brain to generate an output in the form of a decision, right? So we're making a decision at each point, which is ideally the best decision based on all those factors and based on the long run, and based on everything that we've taken in. And so the the skill set of making better decisions based on the information that's available to us, that's a really valuable thing in life in a number of ways. But I think in just just as important as that is the ability to take in or to understand which information from our environment is important or relevant and which information is not, right?
Mhm.
Because we get a lot of useless information. We get a
Yeah.
lot in our culture nowadays. We get a lot of information from our environment that actually isn't helping us to make any kind of better decisions in our life, or it isn't helping us to um, improve the quality of our experience. Uh, it's just information that's out there. It might be stuff that we see on social media about somebody else's life. It might be, information we read about what's going on in the world. It might be information that we have access to based on, just understanding what's going on in our immediate world, our family, our friends, things like that. There is a lot of information that we're constantly processing all the time. And I think that a huge skill set that poker has kind of taught me is to really quickly be able to identify when some of the information that I'm taking in is really relevant to me or really useful versus when it's just kind of background noise, right? And it's not that something that's just background noise is completely meaningless or anything like that. It's just that it's very important to be able to identify something, for example, that you can learn from. So when you're scrolling Twitter or when you're, reading some article on a website, it could be about something that you're just interested in a very casual way. But when you pick out a piece of information that is useful, being able to retain that and understand what it means in relation to how it might help you, that's a really important skill. And in poker, you're constantly looking for information that is useful. You're constantly looking for not just the basic information about what's going on, but you're looking for information and patterns that can actually help you to make better decisions. And I think that skill set of identifying the things in our environment that are actually relevant for us or useful for us, it's becoming more and more important these days because we're just living in an information orientated world, right? We have so many. If you log on to YouTube right now, everybody has, I don't know, 100 different YouTube channels they're subscribed to, and all those channels are putting out videos all the time, and they're putting out videos with information in them. And we have to try to decide which of that information is relevant to us right now and how we want to spend our time based on the information we have access to. And the skill of knowing who to learn from, what to learn, how to spend our time to help ourselves to either maximize our enjoyment of it or maximize the learning and the growth that we get from that. I think poker taught me a lot about that, or poker has taught me a lot about that, and it continues to all the time.
And I think one more thing is that information that you're consuming, what place it comes from, or just like in poker, for example, we are seeing 5 data points, but then all of a sudden this data point that this guy was bluffing me 2 hands earlier becomes a huge thing because it hit you on an ego level or something, it hit you on a personal level.
Right.
Same thing with the information on the internet. So let's say I have this 2 YouTube channels which I can watch, but then something is going to give me more of an instant gratification feel, which is going to suffice me more on a temporary emotional level, but probably not so much of a use to how I will use my time. But I think that is also quite important to discern what sort of a emotional reaction from which you're coming, like how much balance are you coming at choosing that decision or not choosing that decision. And then when so sort of getting into this a little bit, so in your perception, what is the role of emotions in general in game or in general in life, like what do you think, what role does they play for you?
I think that in poker specifically, the strange thing about poker is there's kind of this narrative where people think that the goal of poker when you're trying to make good decisions is to just remove emotion, right? To not make decisions based on emotion at all. And then as a product of believing that, they set the goal for themselves of, I don't want to feel any emotion while I'm playing. Because if I feel no emotions while I'm playing, then that's going to allow me to make the best decisions. And for a long time, that was kind of the way I approached it. I looked at it as, I want to try to develop a methodology where when I sit down, I'm just super balanced the whole time. And then I don't feel anything until after I'm done playing. And then I start feeling emotions again, you know? Um, but the reality of it is that biologically, that's not really realistic. You know, it's not really feasible for us to put ourselves in a position where for a certain length of time, we just like shut off our emotions. And if we do have the ability to do that, the reason for that is because we're kind of damaging ourselves, right? Like that it can be very damaging to shut off in that way. There's a cost to it. And you see people do this. You see people kind of shut down their emotions when they're responding in a way where they've been traumatized in some way. Like if you talk to people who have been through a lot of really traumatic experiences, that's when the body kind of shuts off your emotions, right? And it sort of goes into self-protection mode. And that's a really difficult thing for somebody to come out of. It's a difficult mode for them to come out of. And I think that the tricky part about poker is that in a lot of cases, our instinct is to want to put ourselves into that protection mode where we don't experience any emotions, because then we never have to feel frustrated about a bad beat and things like that. But ultimately it isn't very sustainable, because it starts to bleed out.
And it is fundamentally flawed in the sense that when I look at emotions, right, emotions is if I have to just look at it in a neurological sense, is generated in the limbic portion of our brain, which is sort of a much more older version, and much more so, like, the distinction between the mind and body is like sort of, dicey, in the sense that you're calling some part to be mind and some part to be body. And so maybe emotions fall more in that category of the body, where it's a much older part of the brain, and hence being there, and all of its manifestation is also very physical. Like, you have, like, a thought may not generate so much of a thing in your stomach, but a feeling sure does, like, generate a lot of thing in your stomach, because it's much more physical in this sense. So when we are attempting to sort of shut down those emotions, what we are basically saying is we want to disconnect ourselves from ourselves, like from our body, in a lot of ways, right? So that is, like, fundamentally flawed, and it never happens. Like, and again, it comes from only from the mind. Like, it's an idea. End of the day, it's an idea. Okay, maybe this is a way in which I can deal with it. And the underlying assumption of it is, like, emotions are a threat, right? Like, because we have been fed that information, we have been, like, the game, because we have not been able to deal with them. Because now imagine if we actually knew the way to deal with those emotions, there wouldn't be so much of a threat. But because we have not been trained from our childhood, like, or otherwise, to what to do with them, no one really talks about that stuff. So we don't know what to do. So maybe we think, okay, if this is not there, I'm good. So
that's exactly right. That's how a lot of people tend to respond when they have those kinds of experiences. People, I think you could, if for anybody listening, like, if you think back to the last time that you took a really bad beat, the process of that, a lot of the time when you take a bad beat, it's a process where you see that it's happened, and you immediately process it as a negative event, and you understand that it's a negative event. And then you have a slight sort of kind of feeling of, like, the emotion kind of comes up, and then your brain kind of kicks in and you sort of cut it off a little bit, right? And that's a pretty common process to go through for somebody, where you recognize the events happened, you feel yourself reacting to it, and then you stop yourself from reacting to it. But the tricky thing about that is that the stimulus, or the origin point for the emotions starting to come up, is it's very hard to neutralize that completely without fixing the perception that is at the bottom of that, or at the root of that. And the perception is that the bad beat is a negative event, right? And if the perception is always that the bad beat is a negative event, and you don't see the bigger picture, and you don't see that this event is just a part of the larger spectrum of events, then that stimulus is always going to be there. And you're always going to have to go through this process of reacting to it and then cutting off the reaction always. And that's going to put a lot of stress on your brain. It's going to be a lot of effort to do that consistently. And it's going to result in having a lot of particularly pent up or unresolved emotions that can accumulate over time when you suffer multiple bad beats in a certain space of time, right? And the only way to correct this is to have a belief that the bad beat is not a negative event, and to really understand on a deep level what that bad beat means, or what the nature of all bad beats is, and to understand the game deeply enough that when you take a bad beat, you really are able to kind of shrug it off, because you don't even really perceive it as a negative event, right? Now
that's so sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, so I was saying that's so like true for like events in life in general too, right? Like so sort of one of the things when I talk to people other than in poker, I think one thing which sort of poker players develop is a knack for dealing with variance in the bigger picture of things, right? And then like when things don't go your way, so like literally the only thing that variance can do to us is stop our volume. Like it's because in some way, like even if you're winning too much or losing too much, and then like, you know what, like I don't feel like playing, and and then the only counter to variance is actually like volume. So and when volume, like when variance hits us, there is this like you're talking about this particular bad beat where that emotion is generated and we are unable to process that emotion. Same thing, like shit goes down in life, which like things, whatever, like your business have come down, like your relationship has broken down, something which has hit you so hard, and then two things. Usually people will try to react to it in an emotional way where just in a way where they suppress it. They're like, okay, just I'm not going to bother about it. I'm going to jump on to the next relationship, try to find the next thing, you know. But then there's a lot more to unpack there in terms of what has happened there, and sort of look at what things you have done and learn a lot about it. So one aspect is that, and the second aspect is about actually only continuing to do your work, continuing to do your thing, because that is the counter to the variance. Because the only thing variance can really do us like just bog us down, put us in a low energy state, so to speak, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing about thinking about those adverse life events is that that's kind of the area where there's no like we're almost at a point there where if, let's say, your relationship breaks down or something happens in your life that's really big and important, like you mentioned, it's not really productive to try to convince yourself that event is not a negative event, right? Because that in the bigger picture of our lives, like obviously these things matter. Like we're not going to the goal isn't to try to convince ourselves that everything is there's no negative events. The goal is when it's really a negative event, we now have to be able to process that. We have to have enough of an emotional, enough of a desire to understand our emotions that we actually take the time to process how we feel, to maybe talk about it, to think about it, and not to just kind of push it aside and pretend it didn't happen. Because those negative events are the ones where, yes, it's going to be the same as that bad beat reaction, where there's going to be an immediate negative emotional reaction, and we don't want to just cut that off, right? We don't want to force ourselves to try not to feel emotions in this case, because that's going to be more damaging in the long run. So in the poker sense, we want to fix the core beliefs about the game, and we want to understand that a bad beat is part of a larger spectrum of variance. But in a life sense, it's, if let's say you're married for 10 years and then your wife leaves you, you're not going to be able to look at that and be like, oh, well, that's just variance. That's it. You're like, it's just, well, of all the of all the wives I could have had,
Yeah.
this was just one of the universes
Yeah.
where my wife happened to leave me.
Yeah.
I just took a bad beat in my
Yeah.
life, like,
Yeah.
because humans aren't built to be able to do that. We're not going to be able to do that
And
with
that's
the
probably
events in
not
our
even
life.
true, right? And the reason like we are blaming the variance is because like and this something which in one of the other calls, like with some of the guys in the Discord chat, we were talking about this, is whenever let's say you're feeling so bad about a bad beat, you are so
Hmm.
much consumed by that individual bad beat that you're actually not paying attention to the 10 other spots where you could have done better,
Mm.
you know,
Hmm.
because your emotional bandwidth is completely gone. And then you end up just blaming that variance, but actually not look at how you've been behaving with your wife for the past 4 years, which has led to the, breakup.
Yeah, exactly.
And then like this is where something interesting for me comes up, which is the role of emotions in like you've briefly spoken about it just now, which is about how emotions are sort of just guidelines. They are just a guiding
Hmm.
principle for an underlying thought belief, like because I think in the video that I shared to you, this we spoke about a little bit, that if let's say in the last over of the cricket match and someone has to have 24 runs to hit, and
Yeah.
if it is Dhoni, he has this belief system within himself that yeah, he can do that, and that's where the emotion which is generating within himself is of confidence, calm, and peace. But if
Hmm.
it's let's say I don't know, Ashish Nehra, then he might be shitting his pants, right?
I was wondering who your example of someone who doesn't do well in those situations was going to be, and
Yeah,
Ashish Nehra is not a bad example, I
yeah.
suppose. I wouldn't back him to make 24 in the last over.
And I think this is where like two aspects of it come in. One is the guy is also not just confidence blindly, right? Like he has
Hmm.
put in his work, like he understands the technical aspects of the game enough, where
Yeah.
he's proven to himself. It's like you're saying, ki don't bullshit yourself saying that it's just variance or something has happened, but he's worked on it enough to actually have the confidence that he can score those 24 runs in the last over. And
Yeah.
so sort of to sort of just break it down, emotion is pointing out at an underlying belief system. If some emotion is generating, it's pointing out an underlying belief system that you may not be able to do it, and it might be actually true. So it's for you to examine it, and most likely it is true. It's for you to examine it and work upon it, so that in the bigger picture, if that's not the emotion that you want, you fix the underlying things, and over a period of time you sort of overcome that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's a lot of signals that we get from emotion as to what needs to be worked on, what doesn't need to be worked on. What are the important things? What are really the things that make the biggest difference? The things that make the biggest impact? Um, there's a lot of feedback that we get. That feedback loop from our emotions is a uh, kind of an inescapable part of just so many aspects of life, and having a having a good relationship with that feedback loop and being able to kind of, I mean, to come back to what I said earlier, to take the right information from that feedback loop and discard the feedback that
Hmm.
isn't particularly useful,
Yeah.
to be able to learn in a way where we can we can understand when we're getting feedback that is reliable and when we're getting feedback that is maybe not reliable.
Hmm.
That's a skill set in itself too, and that's another thing that poker teaches you. There's just there's so many things there that
Yeah.
the process of trying to get really good at poker will kind of force you to get really good at a lot of other things, I think.
True, true. And what is also something which poker particularly teaches us is about being sort of process oriented than being result oriented, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that, how that applies both within the game and outside the game, and maybe even about a little bit about how you can extend, because people, like even in the context of poker, people know about that in the technical aspect of things, but not so much in the mindset aspect of things.
Right. And I think that what it really comes down to is understanding the difference between the things that we control and the things that we don't, right? In that there's a lot of things in poker that we don't control. In the short term, we don't control, well, really, we don't control results in any term,
Yeah.
because even over a very long term sample, even over a very large sample, we don't control whether we make, I don't know, $20,005 or $20,010, right? We don't control the exact specific amount of money that we make because there's always going to be a tiny amount of variance there. But what we want to look at is we want to have a perspective where we're not trying to scramble to control things that we don't. And we have a very clear idea of what we control and what we don't. And so when we set goals that are, when we set goals that are based partly on factors that we don't control, we're actually taking away some control from ourselves because we're assigning importance to something that is not fully within our capacity to control. And we're then our achievement of that goal or failure, a success or failure, is going to be at least partially due to factors that are not up to us. So if we do achieve that goal, we won't be able to fully congratulate ourselves because it wasn't just us that was responsible for that. And if we fail, we're not going to exactly know why we failed necessarily, because it's not something where we can definitively say, I had full control, but I didn't do this, and therefore I failed, or that's why this. We can't evaluate the outcome in the right way, basically, once we get to that point. So when we set a focus on the process instead of the goals itself, what happens is we can now start to identify very specific things over which we have direct control. So the amount of time that we spend playing, for example, in poker, the number of hands that we play, we have direct control over that because we can reach a certain number of hands and then stop, or we can make a choice to play more hands at a certain point because we have, let's say a certain amount of time, and we can choose what to do with that time. We can choose to play poker instead of doing something else. So, I mean, obviously there are limits there because we only have a certain amount of time in a week or in a month, depending on how we're measuring this process, right? But ultimately we do have control over certain aspects, certain very specific things that we have very direct control over. And when we're process focused, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead. Like, just finish off.
Oh, I was just going to say, when we're process focused, it allows us to keep the perspective of continuously evaluating on the basis of the things that we control, and we can sort of push to one side the things that we don't, because the things that we don't control are it's just a waste of time to think about them, right? It's wasted energy. And that's what process orientation does for me.
So how do you extend that same concept to the mindset side of things, right? Because like even with like, so at least in technical, right, like there is some stuff is tangible. You can look at hands, you can look at whatever, right? And then in terms of mindset, firstly, there isn't enough data to look at. Secondly, even if there is data, I'm not aware of it because I have no way to, like, it sort of just comes down to presence, right? Like however are you in terms of in the moment it's happening and how much do you remember. So when you're getting that kind of a not so very clear perception on the side of things, and then the results are like completely extreme where they're completely deteriorating your perception of what has happened. So how do we be process oriented in such a untangible aspect of the game?
That's a good question. I think there are ways of doing it. I think that anytime you can do some kind of tracking or some kind of check-in with yourself as to how you're actually feeling and how you're thinking at a given moment, so that you can come back and evaluate at a later point, that's going to help you to understand what the process is going to be like, or that's going to help you to understand what the process was like when you look back at it later, right? So, for example, keeping a poker journal where after every session you write down what your thoughts are, something like that. That's a process you can implement that allows you to revisit what you were thinking at a certain moment and track how you were thinking and feeling over time. And that process is something that you can implement because you directly control it, right? And the same goes for a lot of things in everyday life. If you're focused on a certain goal that you want to achieve in life, but that goal is going to require certain steps to be implemented before you can achieve it, then focusing on the process of implementing those steps is going to allow you to, first of all, recognize the things that you're doing very well as maybe the areas that could be improved. But it's also going to allow you to look back when you're done and see what the emotional experience
Yeah.
of that was. And you're
Yeah.
going to be able to get feedback from yourself almost of, okay, well, when I did this, during this part of the process, maybe I was feeling less confident, or I was feeling less optimistic.
Yeah.
And that was because of this factor.
Yeah.
But now I know, when I look back, that actually I ended up doing fine in that area. So my lack of confidence was not a good signal to me as to what the result was going to be, because actually I was fine, even though I didn't have confidence, right?
Yeah.
Or
it could be
maybe
the
I
other way
was
around too, right? Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe I was overconfident
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
certain area.
Yeah.
And now I need to take some feedback from that part of the process that next time, I
Yeah.
should take more care here not to be
Yeah.
overconfident. So
Knowingly or
there's a number
unknowingly,
of ways to do it.
I've sort of did this thing of like starting to journal. I didn't know it was called journaling or whatever. I was just like, just so much in my head. I was like, I just had to put it out. And
Yeah.
and at that time, maybe I didn't have so many people who could share that, like I could share it with. And then I was like, okay, maybe I'll just put all these things down. And interestingly, what I had done is I just kept writing. I never really looked back at it, what I was writing. It was more like I was just writing it off. So, and then once maybe 6 months down the line, 1 year down the line, when you start looking back at it, then certain patterns start to emerge, right? And like you can see that something has happened, and then how you reacted to that and what you went through, and this loop has happened over and over and over again. So once now through this way, I was able to start getting emotional data on my macro emotions also. And
Yeah.
if I have to talk about just an in-game session thing also, maybe something which I recently started doing and which worked out was, let's say I already between a session I had a feeling that maybe during a certain period of time in the next 10 minutes I had just gone bonkers because of something. Then now I just would go to Poker Tracker and look at that area of time, and look at some of the hands there, and then I start putting technical tags to these hands. Ki bhai, this was a certain technical mistake. It's a polarization error, or it was like a two at a bluff catch, whatever it could be. Like, and then start getting more information on how the mental game, like the mental imbalances, are translating to technical.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and both in the mental realm of things, over a period of time, we have enough data to start seeing cycles, and sometimes it's very disheartening also, to be honest. Like, I remember this one time where I was like almost writing for a year, and then one day I just read it and I was like, dude, like I am exactly at the same point where I was 1 year ago. It was
Yeah.
so painful.
It's funny. Yeah, it can be painful, but the feedback that you get from that realization
Yeah,
is that's valuable stuff. That's a
true.
moment where you get the opportunity to kind of really evaluate, like, if I'm at the same point I was a year ago, why is that the case?
Yeah.
Why am I in this particular situation? So that's another
Yeah.
another way where having a good relationship with the feedback loop itself is important, because if you take that feedback of, I'm in the same place as I was a year ago, and suddenly you're like, oh, what's the point of anything? I'm going to give up, like, all that stuff. That's damaging. That's not going to achieve your goals. And so
and that point was very
question there is,
pivotal.
how do I get a new process?
That point was very pivotal because it then sort of like really put things in perspective, and I was like, okay, this is something which I have to prioritize, and this stuff, like, I'm done with this shit. Like, I can't keep on going in this loop again and again. And that
Right.
over a period of time has then like started making those changes. So sort of jumping it a little bit ahead with the conversation. So,
Sure.
like we spoke about a lot of stuff which teaches us about general in life, right? So, like, which are transferable to other things, but it also teaches about, like, shows us about ourselves. So,
Yeah.
what did you discover about yourself, like, through this whole journey, and the general
Interesting.
human conditioning through the game of poker?
Yeah, I think that I've learned at the start of my poker career, I wasn't really very in touch with my logical brain in a lot of ways. And I think that my over time, what I've started to to kind of learn about myself is how really for a lot of my life up until the point when I started really diving into poker, I was very governed by my emotional brain.
Mm-hmm.
I was making a lot of decisions based on my emotional brain and based on a a sort of a desire to reach a certain point emotionally. But then when I started diving into poker and I started really seeing poker as something that I was wanting to put a lot of my energy into, what ended up happening was I found that through the development of my logical brain or through the development of uh, just spending a lot of time trying to work through problems logically, my emotions actually, or my emotional experience of life actually improved, right? So
Mm.
because I was spending less time, it's almost like your emotions kind of passively get better when you spend less time on them. It's a weird phenomenon, or at least it was for me, because as soon as I threw myself into poker and I started dedicating a lot of energy to getting better at it, um, that was a point where I started to experience a lot of growth, and it took a long time. It took a long time to reach a point where I felt like my emotional experience of poker was what I wanted it to be. But the starting point for that was I I found something that I was passionate about and I wanted to throw a lot of my energy into it. Um, and that was what actually led me to, a better emotional experience of life. And I think before, admittedly, before I discovered poker, I was pretty young. Like I
Mm-hmm.
discovered it when I was about 24. So like I
Mm.
wasn't exactly,
Yeah.
I wasn't sort of fully formed at that point, but like I I definitely believed prior to that basically I thought it was a question of like you you get your emotions in order and then you figure out what you want to do with your life. And that
Mm-hmm.
was the problem with me
Mm.
for such a long time was I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with my life because that's how I perceived it. I was like I need to get to the point where I feel okay so that
Yeah.
I can figure out what I want to do with my life.
Mm.
And then what happened was something came along where I was like, oh, maybe this is what I want to do with my life. And
Mm.
suddenly that was what helped me to figure out a lot of my emotions. So it was a funny experience. And
Yeah.
it's
That's
taught
where.
me, it's taught me a lot about uh, how my emotions over time have changed and how it's correlated with having something I can throw my energy at like poker.
That's quite interesting. And so basically, something which I have sort of discovered through this game about myself is also that
Mm-hmm.
um, you know uh, both about the general conditioning, like the general conditioning about what success means, right? And then how at the start of the career I'm like the only agenda is sort of key, just be better, like, and then
Mm-hmm.
this whole and this sort of goes to the childhood and everything, right? Like how you've been
Yeah.
brought up, how it has always been told it's important to be the topper of the class, and then there is a comparative mind state that you develop, and there's always a so you always have this perspective that okay, you got to be better, right? But then again, what, like, you are happy just being better
Mm-hmm.
in the 10 people that you're playing. Now you go
Yeah.
play like whatever, like a national level, and then you're crushed, and then like, oh wow, like then suddenly you take the hit on a self-worth, and then you get variance, and then you suddenly boost up, okay, I'm doing great in the national level too. And
Yeah.
then it just was like a, like, just like this
Mm-hmm.
then, and then slowly it started becoming more and more stable, and then you are more at peace with what you are, and how it is not a reflection of the self-worth. Because I've shared this with the community, and like I've put out a video on this where I had gone through this whole um, perception battle with myself, where or
Mm-hmm.
like how am I perceived to be. And then
Yeah.
you have so many illusions about it. Over a period of time, with all these ups and downs, it starts breaking, and you become, okay, I'm neither that nor this. I'm not, I don't need to
Yeah.
identify myself with being super good or like super bad, because both are
Hmm.
false. You're some days good, some days bad, and and then you're trying to get better. And while I'm just investing all this energy and validating that information or disvalidating, I'm not doing the
Hmm.
process that needs to be done, which is to
Yeah.
actually look at the game, look at my health, look at my mind state, and like start working on all of that stuff.
Right.
um
Exactly.
yeah, great. And then how did this whole experience of sort of discovering your uh, self through the game change your perspective of life?
Hmm.
um
Interesting. I think that it made me conscious. It made me conscious that even though I had always had a mentality where I wanted to do something with my life that would help other people. It
hmm,
made me realize that I was not in a position to help other people
hmm.
until I got
Help
myself in
yourself.
order, right?
Yeah.
Like until I like got myself together.
Yeah.
Um, and for a long time, I felt like a kind of sense of wanting to do wanting to like start out by saying I'm going to do things for other people. I want to find something to do with my life that is meaningful and contributes to the world as a whole. um and I think that I kind of had that process inverted because I wasn't in a position where I was going to be able to help other people a lot because I had my own stuff to fix, you know. I
Hmm.
had my own things to work through before I could help other people. And it wasn't that I I needed to spend some time being selfish or anything like that. It was that the things I was going through, the emotions I was going through were making me less effective in everything that I did.
Hmm.
And so in order to become more effective, in order to reach a point where I could have the level of impact on the world that I wanted, I had to start looking at myself and taking time for myself. And I had to actually spend time doing things just because I wanted to do them. So I became a poker player because I wanted to be a poker player, not because it was going to help the world in some way.
Hmm.
When that happened, now the whole thing kind of started to change over time. And I feel like I'm now at a point where I can actually do things that help other people a lot
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
because I have spent time working on myself and I have a stable baseline that I can
Hmm.
work from, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. And like it sort of brings out an interesting point, which is that even when we are pursuing a game, which is sort of known to be a negative sum game in a lot of ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
uh, and then by but on one layer it is negative sum game, but on in so many other layers it can be such a positive sum game, because
Mm-hmm.
you are growing, you are sharing that growth with people, and then you get to actually see them go through that journey, and then like they've become a better version of themselves, and you have some part to play in that. And
Mm-hmm.
then all of this so then this sort of makes the whole question of like the quality of the activity is not like, is it inherent to the activity itself or how we approach that activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
um,
Right.
because something which which has hit me also in terms of changing my perception that this game has given in terms of life is also that I might be a guy who is just fighting a war, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm just by the force of profession, I'm just probably killing people down.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can within yourself in the way you approach that stuff, and like there is a certain subtle aspect of things which are beyond the activity itself, because there
Mm-hmm.
is a if
Yeah.
like so I mean, I don't know about this. This is an extreme way of putting it, but I think in one of the things that Krishna, like in fact in Gita, Krishna talks about this, saying that
Mm-hmm.
even if you kill all the people here, and if you get your own realization, it's still worth it. I mean, it's just an extreme way of putting it, but the point that he's sort of getting at is like the activity that you are doing and the quality which you are doing are sort of you know perpendicular in some sense, and it need not be
Mm-hmm.
the like there a butcher can be a yogi, like a guy who is butchering can be an enlightened person within himself while still doing that activity.
Hmm. Yeah,
Ah,
that's a really interesting philosophy. That's something that my friend Jason Su, who's a
yeah, yeah,
presence coach and body presence coach, he puts a lot of stuff out there related to that. I think that with the way the modern world works, I think that there's a lot to be said also for understanding what your own values are as a person. And I think that it's difficult. It's definitely harder for someone to achieve a a level of meaningful connection with what they're doing if what they're doing doesn't connect with their values. So for most people, if you're doing something that, like you gave the example of the soldier who's out there in a war killing a bunch of people, like for most
mhm,
people, yeah, killing, it's going to be a lot harder to find meaning in
yeah,
killing a bunch of people than it is to find meaning in something that connects to their values. But at the
yeah,
same time, there's always that sense that we as an individual have a lot of agency, not full agency, but a lot of agency over the frameworks that we use psychologically to understand what's going on around us and interpret what's going on around us. And that kind of ability to shift our perspective is extremely powerful and it's
yeah,
extremely valuable, I think. So yeah, if we are in the middle of playing poker, we have a choice as to how we experience that activity. And we
yeah,
also have a lot of choice as to how we use poker to either be a positive force or a negative force in how we influence the
yeah.
people around us to some degree as well.
And this sort of trickle downs both like into the micro and the macro, right? Like even
Mhm.
in a session, like the whole perception of a downswing, right, is just a frame.
Yeah.
Like it's
Hmm.
just a frame from which you're looking at stuff, and both in terms of macro also, because this some interesting anecdote which happened was like. So my brother is into movie direction and stuff like that. So one day we went to
Oh,
his
cool.
friend's party and we were coming back and we were listening to this music, and in the middle of the drive the music got disconnected, and he was just
Okay.
like for the next 2 minutes he was trying to like he stopped the car, he's trying to figure out the music, and nothing
Yeah.
really worked out, and then he's like, okay, let's change the climax, you know.
Yeah.
He said this thing very casually, but it really hit me later on because it's like all of the thing that we are looking at is a movie and we are the directors
Hmm.
of this movie, and we
Mm.
can, so what he's basically saying is let me reframe it in my head where I enjoy this, like, you know,
Yeah.
like where some other
Hmm.
music is being played and I still will enjoy. I'll not insist on how it needs to be. I wanted techno, but this guy's playing some retro music, so let me just change the climax and enjoy this music, right?
Yeah. That's
and
interesting. That's an interesting perspective. I like that.
and then it was during that time I was sort of going through a down phase, like mental down phase and all of that, and then it sort of brought me to this perspective that okay, let me start zooming out of my character, like because of all like engagement with my brother, I started getting a little bit into writing and stuff. So
Hmm.
then I saw myself as this character who's experiencing his life as a character, right? but
Yeah.
then but then there are people around me, there's a life story that's happening, and the story of it all is like really beautiful. It's just that my character, which is just going through some
Mm.
pain, like if I'm just watching a movie, you know, the character is feeling bad, you don't feel the pain
Yeah.
as a viewer, you just see the whole picture and like you understand, okay, why is he going through that stuff. So
Yeah.
that sort of brought me to a point where I was just able to zoom out for a moment and see, oh wow, like, and that's when a certain frame shift happened where I was like, okay, irrespective of what I am personally going through, the story of it all makes sense and it's so beautiful, and this sort of
Yeah.
changed the perspective, like sort of we were talking about how the game changed my perception of life. So this was one of the pivotal points which was sort of given by poker, where I was going through a mental downswing, like a financial downswing, and then something happened which sort of just was able to put me one step back and take a zoomed out picture.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I like that.
so
That's good to know. I'm glad you were able to get that perspective.
yeah. And then we sort of bringing the whole thing together. So in this thing, so then what is the real game for you, right? Like, so
Huh. Interesting.
we spoke about all these aspects. So now what is the real game for you? Yeah.
For me, the real game is growth as a human being.
Hmm.
Not growth in the sense of I want to grow my, I don't know necessarily. It's not about not thinking of it in terms of growing a business or growing my poker profits or anything like that. It's about developing a sense of how you're learning as you progress through life, and how you're getting older and you're getting wiser all the time, right? In that we can't avoid the aging process. We don't yet have a scientific way to negate the aging process, but what we can do is we can make sure that as we get older, we grow in some capacity in ourselves, and we can use that to continue passing on more and more knowledge and information and contribution to the people around us and to society as we progress through life. And if we keep a focus on that, if we keep a focus on personal growth, even if it's personal growth during a time when we're going through really difficult things, that in itself is almost always going to lead to some level of fulfillment and enjoyment on our part in how we experience life. And for me, yeah, that's a good way of describing it. That's the real game for me, as opposed to winning or losing or anything that involves financial goals, wealth goals, or anything like that. It's really about growth.
I dig that. I think there's a famous quote by Swami Vivekananda where he said, "Life is like a gymnasium where we come to make ourselves stronger." So I think
There we go.
Yeah, so
that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, and so sort of so let me just give a shout out to the guys who are in the chat. Flameboy 986 has been a consistent viewer, like he's interested in these conversations. Anush Dagar in the chat, Namita in the chat. Manik asked a question, Matt, if someone is not at the level of tracking their game, how can he mentally be strong and play in his starting of his poker journey? Like he isn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you say not at the level of tracking their game, I'm going to assume what that means is either this person is primarily playing live and they don't have tracking, or they don't have access to tracking software or something like that.
And or also like maybe like aware enough to know is like we also spoke about the mental game, so maybe he could be referring to that.
I see. Okay. So just kind of at a beginner level, I guess. So the way I would say to approach it is that there are tracking processes that are available to everybody, in the sense that if you have a pen and paper, you can do some tracking. You can do a bit of writing about what your experience was of playing. You can write down information about what your thoughts were during your session, after your session. You can take some notes about how you experienced that particular session. And over time, your experience will change. Over time, you'll start to notice that you feel more confident, less confident at certain times. But if you don't have anything to look back on as to how to identify how was I feeling a week ago, a month ago, how was I feeling at this point, it's going to be harder to see the development. It's going to be harder to actually look back and say, I'm definitely doing better than I was before, because now I can see the difference in how I interpret certain things. So I would say that even if you don't have tracking software, if you're playing live and you can't track hands that well, if you're at a very beginner level and you don't necessarily know where your strengths and weaknesses are, just start writing stuff down, start communicating with people, start involving yourself in a process where you have something you can look back at later on to show where you were at this point in time in some way. And if you can look back and see where you were, then I promise you, when you get to a point in future where you have developed and grown and evolved, you're going to be able to see, oh, look, a month ago, I didn't understand this concept, and now I do. And that is going to make you feel more confident, because now you recognize that you're learning and you're getting better.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, so there are frameworks, like if you are sort of unaware of what to write about or what sort of things to go by, there are some frameworks which some books already have by, like maybe there are certain journals which have a certain framework in which they ask you the questions to sort of think about, and which guides you through that process of like discovering what are the things that you want to get done, or struggling with, or like have an activity sort of thing. In fact, like my wife Namita, she's an illustrator, and
Oh, cool.
she's been working on a certain planner and like a diary journaling sort of a thing, which basically helps people to get on that journey. So once that is out, also I'll share with you guys if you want to start
Cool.
get on with that journey.
Yeah,
Um,
awesome.
so lastly, I have a final question to you.
Sure.
Uh, what do you want to be known for in your life,
Ooh, interesting.
or
Um,
or be forgotten?
I don't think I want to be forgotten, but I think what I would like to be known for is someone who made a contribution to help other people improve their emotional experience of life. That's all. Because the way I look at it is like every single goal that we set in life, if it's money, if it's getting, getting healthier, getting fitter, things like that, almost every, well, yeah, I mean, really every goal that we set, our goal is to just enjoy life more, right? It's to improve the way we experience life. If we feel sad, we want to feel less sad. If we feel happy, we want to feel even more happy.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we feel really, really good, we still want to feel better. So for me, the only thing that really matters in the grand scheme of things when it comes to contributing to the world as a whole is, does it improve people's experience of life on an emotional level? And I, through my mental health activism, through anything that I do with poker, if I can help people to enjoy life more, to experience life in a better way, then I would be very happy to remember that way. I think that's the answer.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. So there's one more
Cool.
question, and maybe then
Sure.
how to manage rest of the session after having some sick bad beats that tilts us.
Okay.
Is getting away
I
from the
think
table or
honestly,
sitting out an option? Yeah, just-
I think if you recognize that you're tilted, if you are able to sit there while you're playing and say, and you immediately recognize that you're tilted, I think you should just quit. Like
Hmm.
I honestly think at that point that if you're getting to the point where you're recognizing you're tilted, then even if you only quit for 20 minutes while you go do something else to get your mind off of it, and then you come back, like that's fine, right? But if you are in the moment of recognizing that you're tilted, you have to do something to break that. You have to do
Yeah,
something to break that emotional state. And usually that's going to involve not just like playing the next hand, right?
yeah,
Because as soon as you're in that emotional state, things are not going to go well. Like you're not going
yeah,
to make good decisions on that next hand. So
yeah,
take a break, quit your session altogether. Whatever it is that feels right in that moment. But most of the time, the way to not be tilted is not going to involve poker. It's
yeah,
going to be to involve something else. And then if you come back to poker and you feel better, that's great.
yeah. There's a way in which I had sort of described in one tweet earlier. Like I just started on Twitter, so one of
Cool.
the first tweets that I did was like a moment of tilt is like sort of like a you have developed a static within yourself. It's
Yeah.
almost like you are an isolated circuit and you have like static developed so much that
Yeah.
anything comes up, you're just gonna blow up. you
Yeah.
know,
Right.
and
That's
then the
basically it. Yeah.
yeah. So the
Hmm.
first thing is sort of to you have to discharge that energy. You have to sort of ground yourself, and there are many ways to ground. In fact, like you mentioned, Jason Su, like I've had, I spoke to him once. Like Nick had connected us, and like we spoke once, and sort of like I totally get from what angle is coming in, and like I think that discharging the grounding step is one of the most
Hmm.
important steps, which is sort of missing in the general dialogue on mental game and all of that.
Yeah.
Because they
Hmm.
talk about injecting logic, but injecting logics comes later on. First, we need to sort of discharge that emotion, ground
Yeah.
ourselves. Maybe just getting in touch with elements helps, like water, earth, like any of the stuff, like air, even just going and taking out fresh air. Um,
Yeah. Definitely.
all these stuff sort of help you discharge that, and then comes the part of like you trying to think back of the game and stuff like that. So I think even like if you're someone is saying even if you're playing tournaments and stuff like that, so what I've sort of done in that regard is, yeah, I've looked at hand histories and looked at what are the sort of mistakes that I'm doing when I'm tilted, because I'm definitely
Hmm.
tilting for the next 5 minutes and I can
Yeah.
clearly see what technical things are happening. So you
Yeah.
start gaining awareness more on your technical stuff and stop paying attention and not do that stuff.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you realize you're tilted and you sort of start letting go of that energy by like just doing like pranayam, like deep breathing or whatever. Anyways, there are many
Hmm.
ways to do it.
Sure.
And then sort of get back in touch with your body in some ways. I think Jason talks about presence, like just feeling all these sensations within yourself, and just paying more attention to that. That way also you get back to presence. Focusing on certain verbs which sort of get you back into flow. That's also another way in which, like his book Poker with Presence, he talks about it a little bit.
Yep.
Um,
Great book.
yeah, great book. I'm in the middle. Like I finished probably half of it. I'm not yet completed, but yeah, I'm
Yeah,
really
really great book.
liking that book. So lovely, man. Lovely catching up with you, Matt. It's
Likewise.
very kind of you to come by here, talk to our
Oh,
community.
I'm happy to do it.
And if any of you guys want to get in touch with Matt, I think he does like the YouTube and the Twitter details are right in the podcast, so you can check that out. And he does. I believe you do weekly podcast on.
Yeah, I do. I stream on Twitch. I'm Mental Health Matt on Twitch. I am live on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. Usually during the day Pacific time, so about 11 a.m. Pacific time, which is about 2 hours from now. So I guess Indian time it's probably pretty late.
Yeah, but
But not too late, I
that's the
guess.
time we guys are gonna be online.
I guess that's true, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
I'm usually live around that time. I do interviews. I do you know, talk segments about mental health and about all kinds of different things. Also just hang out and play games as well.
Mhm.
So you can find me there. You can find me on YouTube as well. As you say, the link is going to be there. And you can
Yeah.
also find me on Twitter. The easiest way to reach me is probably on Twitter. My DMs are always open. So if anybody has questions or whatever, you can just drop me a message.
Lovely, lovely. Very nice talking to you. I'm like, let's catch up
Likewise.
soon, and like maybe some of the stuff in general, just we can keep talking stuff from time to time, I guess.
For sure, man. Take care.
Yeah.
I will be happy to talk about anything more of this really interesting conversation. So thanks, man.
Yeah. So see you, man. See you. It was lovely talking
Cool.
to you. See you guys. See you guys in the next episode of The Real Game. We'll have another guest where we'll talk from different areas of life. The idea is to get to how the things that they're doing in their life sort of bridges the gap towards the main essence of life, of like Matt spoke about growing in life. So see you guys in the next episode. Later, man.